Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This is our launch video for the vintage series that's coming up. In my hand, I have the gorgeous yellow and white Dresdan Plate vintage quilt. Now the edges of this quilt are all worn. There's several spots on the quilt, and it was donated with the intent of having it crafted into something new. So we're upcycling this vintage quilt, and we're going to be making 6 different projects from it. So I'm super excited. In this video, I'm going to talk through the projects that I'm going to be creating with this quilt and showing you how I'm cutting it up and getting them all lined out in my project pile. So the upcoming videos will go through one project at a time. So if you're interested in what we're to do with a vintage quilt, please stay tuned. If you like what I do with the vintage quilt, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment on any of the videos in the series. So we're going to head on over to the cutting table. I'm going to show you my plan for the quilt, and then we're going to start cutting it up and getting it divided into those different projects. All right, now I fully understand that this is one of those times that you're either going to love me or hate me, but this is what we're doing. So I have on my little notebook several projects to do with this quilt. And this is just kind of how I went through dividing it up and deciding what I had, what I could do with this quilt and what I had in mind to do with it as well for projects. So basically the quilt, when it's all out flat, I have 30 Dresdan plates. And the Dresdan plates for the most part are in pretty good shape, but there's lots of stains and things around on the backing of the quilt and on the front of the quilt. And the projects were selected basically based on what I had that was usable and what I had that's not usable and how I could kind of hide some of those blemishes in different projects. So I am actually going to be using the majority of this quilt. I am going to have a little bit of scrap left over, but not too much. So the project I have in mind for this quilt, we are going to be making a tote bag. We're going to be making a framed art piece. We're going to be making a smaller quilt out of the larger quilt, so a mini quilt from it. It's going to be a cut-throw size. We're going to take some of the Dresdans and go vintage to modern, so taking a little spin on that. And then we're also going to be making a set of placemats. And we may even make a zippered bag out of this too. It just depends on how much is left after we have those first 5 projects done. So without further ado, we're going to start cutting this quilt apart, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through how I'm going to do that. So for my tote bag, I want to make sure that I have a pretty decent edge because I'm going to use this top edge on my tote bag. And when I flip this over, this is completely worn. It has a hole in it, so I know that's not the square that I'm going to go with. But I do want to get one close to the edge, and this one looks like it would be good. And actually, this edge of the quilt is good too, so I could just use these 2 squares right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some sharp scissors and just cut down along those seam lines, and then I'm going to put a label on that and put that to the side. So I am using some of my very sharp quilting scissors, and like I said, I am going to use the edge of this as well. So I am going to go ahead and cut right through this little Dresdan in the border here and go right down the seam that's between these 2 blocks. Careful not to cut any of the other layers of the quilt because this quilt honestly is very thin. So just be a little cautious, and you could totally use a rotary cutter for this if you wanted. I'm just not going to worry about that too much just because these blocks are rather large and there's a lot of white space around them. So no matter what I decide to use these blocks for, it's going to be okay because I could trim them down a little bit if necessary. And I am going to use this border piece for something else. So for right now, I'm going to leave that attached to the rest of the quilt, and I'm just going to cut this section out. So these are going to be for my project tote, or for my tote bag rather. And I am going to go ahead and make a label and put those to the side. Now, when I talk about making a label, there's nothing fancy here. I'm really just going to write on a sticky note, tote bag, and then I'm going to pin it on to this section of the quilt. I've actually kind of mapped out the quilt for what I'm going to use where. Now I already deviated, but I have this whole entire top row and 2 of those blocks are my leftovers, so it doesn't really matter. For the next project, I'm actually going to be going to the floor for this one, and that's because I want to go ahead and cut out my 4x5 section of my little mini quilt that I'm going to be doing. And that is going to honestly be the majority of this quilt, is I'm just going to be taking this and I'm taking the borders off of it because all of the borders are frayed, and I'm going to be cutting out a 4x5 section. If I can find a 4x5 section where all the Dresdens are in good condition. So I'm just kind of looking here to see if all of them are good, just giving a good little spot check. Now, I will also tell you that if some of them aren't quite perfect, it's okay, because I have a couple things in mind that I'm going to do to make sure that I can still use this as a mini quilt. So this does look like a pretty good area. Let's see, I might be able to cut it this way too. The problem is I have a one little Dresden right here that is very threadbare, and no matter which way I cut this quilt, it's going to be there. But like I said, I do have something in mind for this little mini quilt. So I think I am just going to go with it and be happy. All right, so I am going to be cutting basically the border off of this quilt. Don't worry, I do have something in mind to use for this border that's still going to give it a new life. Nothing in the quilt will be wasted. Well, there may be a little bit of waste, but nothing too crazy is going to be wasted. Okay, so my mini quilt is going to be 4x5. So I do have 5 Dresdens that way, and I have 4 this way. So I'm just going to cut this across and then cut off that other border, and we will have that little mini quilt out of the way. And that's really the majority of this quilt. Just because I do want to give you an alternative way that you can do your cutting as well. You can, if you have smaller pieces, I just don't have like a huge cutting spot. But if you have smaller pieces like this, then you can definitely use your rotary trimmer and it will be a lot faster. Just be really careful because, you know, rotary cutters cut really quickly. So I'm just going to line my ruler up on that edge. And we'll cut off this border off the remaining side. Now you definitely could have put a new piece of bias tape on this edge if you wanted to. You wouldn't necessarily had to have just completely reconstructed the quilt. But like I said, this quilt was donated with the intent of having it repurposed into other things. So that is what we are doing. All right, so this is going to be labeled mini quilt. I'm super excited about the project that I have for the border. I think you're gonna love it. I'm not gonna tell you any more than that. You'll have to watch the vintage to modern. And that's when I will be using all of this border, or the majority of it at least. So stay tuned for that. But like I said, I am super excited about it. I hope it turns out as good as I think it's going to. It's probably going to depend a little bit on a closer inspection of the border. And I am seeing a lot of wear and tear on this border, but we will just hope for the best on it. So now we're left with a section of 8 blocks. 5 of those blocks will be going into our vintage to modern quilt. One of them is for a framed art piece, and then 2 of them are for a couple different projects that I have in mind. I think we're gonna be doing placemats and a zippered bag. So I'm just going to kind of look and see. I really definitely want the framed art one. It doesn't matter really what the condition is of the Dresden. So if there's one on here that is worse for wear, then it will be perfect for that project and won't hurt anything. If there is one that, but I definitely see this one right here. This one has a little bit of oof in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and move this down, and I will use my ruler. I'm actually going to use my 12.5-inch ruler, I believe. These are, I think, 13.5-inch blocks, but I can wiggle it a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to cut this block out because that tells me that that's the one that needs to be the framed art, because it's the one that has a little bit of a problem. It has some wear in it, so that's not going to be good in a quilt or in a project bag, or a zippered bag rather. Okay, and then I think just to keep it easy, I'll cut these 2 off for my placemats and zippered bag, and the other 5 will be in the vintage to modern quilt. All right, so let's get all of these labeled. All right, so this is my framed art because it has that little tear in the Dresden that's not going to work well in a usable like quilt or, you know, home decor item, but for a framed art, it's fine. These, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart as well. And, you know, if I decide later that I want to switch these around or whatever, I can. I'm not like totally stuck on this, but this helps me remember what my projects were. And it helps me remember what I was, what I'd allocated the different pieces for of the quilt to go into. Plus that way I know that I've already spot checked and everything's good. So I have the quilt cut up and I have my project pile made here. Everything's labeled. I will probably end up putting all of these strips in with the vintage to modern quilt and put that into its own little project box. And then these other 4 will go into a project box, and then the mini quilt will go into one as well. So that way when I have time, I can just grab that one project box. I know that that's the pieces that are allocated for that project, and I can just start working on it. The notebook paper that I showed you earlier, that one will definitely go in with one of those boxes just to keep my brain clear, to remind myself what I was planning on doing with that. So I'm super excited to start this series for you guys, and I hope that you pick up some tips and tricks from it. I hope that you have vintage quilts in your stash that just need new life, that you are brave enough to upcycle them and turn them into something new and glorious. So if you like this idea, like the video, and then subscribe to the channel so you can see the upcoming videos. Hit the bell for notifications so you're one of the first ones to know when a video posts. Until next time, find joy in all you do, carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.